Concord Spire did not float so much as it hung in the void, a jagged splinter of metal and ceramic caught in the gravity well of a dying star. Beyond the reinforced armor-glass of the observation decks, the nebula of lost ships bled violet and bruised purple across the cosmos, a celestial bruise that refused to heal. It was a fitting backdrop for the station. For 20 years, this place had been the only patch of neutral ground in a galaxy tearing itself apart. Jim Hale pushed his cleaning cart across the deck of Sector 7. One wheel had a distinct wobble, creating a rhythmic squeak thump, that echoed under the low hum of the atmospheric recyclers. The air here always smelled the same ozone-stale coffee and the sharp metallic tang of anxiety. He stopped by a large viewport ostensibly to wipe away a smudge that did not exist. In reality, he was watching the arrival of the heavy cruisers. To the left, the blocky, utilitarian silhouette of a Terran Alliance destroyer docked its hull, scarred by plasma burns. To the right, sleek and predatory, the Lupine Empire's ships glided into their berths. They looked like silver daggers wrapped in silence. Jim lowered his head and scrubbed the glass. He knew exactly how long it took for the docking clamps to engage: 45 seconds for human ships, 30 seconds for the Lupine vessels. He knew the rotation schedule of the security drones by heart. He knew that the camera in the north corner had a blind spot exactly 3 feet wide if one stood directly beneath it. It was not the mind of a janitor. It was the mind of a scout, a survivor, a ghost. But on his ID badge, clipped to a gray jumpsuit that had seen better days, it simply read, Jim Hale. Sanitation Level 4. He rubbed his thumb over the handle of his mop. Deep in the back of his mind, a memory clawed at the door he kept locked. A red sky. The sound of atmospheric thrusters screaming like banshees. The colony of Everlight Ridge burning until the snow turned to gray slush. Jim squeezed his eyes shut. Not today, he told himself. Today is just another shift. Just another day of cleaning up the mess, while the important people decide if we keep killing each other. He turned his cart around and headed toward the cafeteria. The lunch rush was beginning, and if there was one thing universal to all species, it was that they were messy eaters. The cafeteria on Concord Spire was a study in segregation. It was a vast, circular room with a domed ceiling that mimicked a Terran sky, though the blue was always a shade too artificial. By tacit agreement, the human officers sat on the west side, and the Lupine delegation sat on the east. Between them lay a demilitarized zone of empty tables, a buffer of silence that no one dared to cross. Jim moved through the aisles collecting trays. He kept his eyes down, his posture slumped. Invisibility was a skill he had perfected. If you looked like you belonged to the furniture, people treated you like furniture. Then, the doors hissed open, and the rhythm of the room faltered. A Lupine female entered. She was not like the warriors who usually strode in with their armor clanking and their hackles raised. She was smaller, her fur a soft, smoky gray. She wore a diplomatic tunic that looked a size too big, and instead of heavy combat boots, she wore soft-soled shoes that made no sound. She held a tray of food with both hands, her ears twitching nervously. This was Pearl Arklaw. Of course, the manifest listed her only as a cultural attaché, a low-level translator. But Jim had seen the way the massive Lupine guards stiffened when she passed the way. They angled their bodies to shield her, without making it obvious. She walked toward the Lupine sector, but it was full. A group of senior pack leaders were deep in a growling argument over a holographic map. She hesitated, ears flattening against her skull. She turned toward the human sector, but a dozen pairs of eyes glared at her with cold hostility. She stood in the middle of the room, the DMZ holding her tray like a shield. She took a step toward an empty table, but her foot caught the edge of a chair leg. She stumbled. The soup bowl on her tray rattled dangerously. Nobody moved. The humans smirked. The Lupines ignored her weakness. Jim sighed. It was a long, weary exhalation that deflated his lungs. He hated the lupines. He hated them for the fire in the sky and the silence of his dead family. But he hated bullies more. He pushed his cart forward the squeaky wheel, announcing his presence. He stopped right next to the empty table Pearl was eyeing. He pulled out a chair with a scrape of metal on synthetic flooring. "Table is clean, miss," Jim said, his voice rough but steady. "Best view of the fake clouds from right here." The cafeteria went silent. The hum of conversation died instantly. Pearl looked at him, her golden eyes widening. The pupils were vertical slits that dilated as she processed his presence. "You are speaking to me." "I am speaking to anyone who does not want to eat standing up," Jim said. He gestured to the chair. "Sit, unless you are waiting for a written invitation from the janitorial staff." She blinked, then a small, tentative smile touched her muzzle. She sat down, placing her tray on the table with a sigh of relief. Jim did not walk away. He pulled out a spray bottle and a rag, pretending to clean the already spotless edge of the table. It was an excuse to stay close, to act as a barrier between her and the stairs. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was melodic with a rolling cadence that made the harsh common tongue sound almost musical. She looked down at her food. "Although I am not entirely sure what I am about to consume." Jim glanced at her bowl. "Ah, that is the chicken-flavored protein block number 7. We call it the Regret Special." Pearl tilted her head. "Chicken. The flightless avian of Earth. I have read about them. Does this taste like them?" "Miss," Jim said, scrubbing a non-existent spot, "this thing has never met a chicken. It has never even seen a picture of a chicken. It is a lie made of soy and sadness. But it keeps you alive." Pearl let out a sound that was half bark, half laugh. It was a bright, startled sound. "A lie made of sadness. That sounds like a line from a pre-war poem. Are you a poet janitor?" "I am a man with a mop," Jim replied. "But I listen. You speak our language well. Better than the diplomats." "I study it," Pearl said. She picked up a spoon, holding it delicately with her clawed fingers. "Your language has 42 words for rain. Did you know that the lupine tongue has only one? Rain is just rain to us. But for humans, it can be a drizzle, a storm, a deluge. It fascinates me. A species so obsessed with categorizing the way water falls from the sky must have a deep capacity for feeling." Jim froze. His hand stopped moving the rag. He looked at her, really looked at her. Beneath the alien features, the fur, and the predator's teeth, he saw an intense, burning curiosity. "We have a lot of words for war, too," Jim said quietly. Pearl's ears dipped. "Yes, I know. I am trying to change that, or at least help the people who can." She lowered her voice, leaning in slightly. "This treaty, the Aurora Accords, it is fragile. It feels like a glass sculpture standing in a wind tunnel. If one person speaks too loudly, it shatters." "Then tell your generals to stop shouting," Jim muttered. "It is not just the generals," Pearl said, her golden eyes scanning the room. "There are people on both sides who profit from the noise. Peace is bad for business when your business is selling coffins." Jim felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's air conditioning. She was not just a translator. She saw the strings. "You should eat your soup," Jim said, his voice low, "before it turns into solid concrete." "Right," she said. She took a spoonful, grimaced, and swallowed. "You were right. The chicken is a myth." They shared a look, a brief, fragile moment of connection across the biological and political divide. For a second, Jim forgot the burning sky. He just saw a girl eating terrible food in a room full of people who wanted her dead. Then the doors slammed open. "Step away from the asset," the voice boomed like a thunderclap. Warhal Keth strode into the cafeteria. He was a mountain of muscle and gray fur, wearing the obsidian armor of the Admiral's personal guard. Behind him were 4 human security officers, their stun batons crackling with blue electricity. Jim straightened up instinctively, shifting his grip on the spray bottle like it was a sidearm. Keth crossed the distance in 3 long strides. He shoved the table aside, sending Pearl's tray crashing to the floor. The regret special splattered across the white tiles like industrial sludge. "You!" Keth snarled, pointing a clawed finger at Jim. "You dare contaminate the perimeter of the High Command's daughter." Pearl stood up, her fur bristling. "Keth, stand down. He was assisting me." "Silence, Pearl," Keth growled, not looking at her. Admiral Havelock monitored the interaction. This human was exhibiting aggressive body language. He was loitering. He is a security risk. "He sat down," Pearl shouted, her voice losing its melodic lilt and gaining the command tone of her father. "He offered me a seat when no one else would. Since when is courtesy a crime?" The human security lead stepped forward. "Since Code 4-Alpha was enacted this morning, Miss Arklaw. No unauthorized personnel within 10 feet of the delegation." He looked at Jim with disdain. "Especially not sanitation staff." Pearl reached for her communicator. "I am calling my father. He will explain." Her device beeped before she could touch it. A deep, gravelly voice echoed from the speaker on her collar. "Pearl, do not interfere with station security. You have already caused enough disruption by entering that area alone. Return to the flagship immediately." "Father," Pearl pleaded. "He did nothing. Return, now." The voice of Wolf Admiral Theris Arklaw brooked no argument. Pearl looked at Jim. Her eyes were wide, filled with a helpless frustration that mirrored his own. "I am sorry," she whispered. Keth grabbed Pearl's arm, not gently, and pulled her toward the exit. She stumbled, looking back over her shoulder as she was dragged away. Jim stood alone in the center of the mess. The human security chief tapped his earpiece. "Clean out your locker, Hale," the officer said. "ID is revoked. Admiral Havelock wants you off the manifest in 10 minutes. "For what?" Jim asked, his voice shaking with a rage he could barely contain. "For talking." "For forgetting your place," the officer spat. "Escort him out." 2 guards grabbed Jim by the arms. He did not fight. He knew the math. 2 stun batons against a spray bottle equaled a trip to the medical bay in handcuffs. As he was dragged toward the service elevators, the station's PA system chimed. The voice of Mop, the janitorial AI, floated down from the ceiling speakers. "Attention, Jim Hale. I am required to inform you that your employment has been terminated. According to Employee Handbook Rule 33B, do not attempt to court fraternize with or otherwise annoy the offspring of enemy warlords during operational hours. Also, I have had to lock your locker. Please do not be mad. I saved your half-eaten sandwich." Some of the officers chuckled. The laughter followed Jim into the corridor, burning hotter than a plasma discharge. They dumped him at the airlock of the industrial docks 3 hours later. Jim sat on a crate of recycled hydraulic fluid, staring at his hands. They were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that had nowhere to go. He had spent 20 years keeping his head down, 20 years swallowing his pride, hiding his skills, pretending he was just a man who pushed a mop. He had done it to survive. He had done it because he believed that if he made himself small enough, the war would miss him. But the war did not miss anyone. It just changed shape. Sometimes it was a bomb. Sometimes it was a laugh in a cafeteria while you lost your livelihood. He closed his eyes, and the memory finally kicked the door down. Everlight Ridge. The settlement was not a fortress. It was a farming community. The sky had turned red not from the sun, but from the drive plumes of the lupine invasion fleet. The wolf ships had descended like locusts. He remembered the sound, the terrible bone-vibrating howl of their engines. He remembered running. He remembered his mother pushing him into the storm drain. He remembered the silence that came after. And today, he had sat with one of them. He had joked with one of them. And because of that, the humans had thrown him out like garbage. "The universe really does have a twisted sense of humor," Jim muttered to the empty docking bay. "It does," a voice said from the shadows. "But usually the punchline is a knife in the back." Jim spun around his hand instinctively, reaching for a weapon, he did not have. A woman stepped out from behind a stack of shipping containers. She was short, with hair cropped close to her skull. Her skin was pale, illuminated by the flickering yellow light of a malfunctioning glow strip. But it was her eyes that caught Jim's attention. The left one was brown. The right one was silver, a military-grade neural interface implant, buzzing with data. "Who are you?" Jim asked, backing up until his spine hit the crate. "Ida Reyes," she said. She didn't walk. She prowled. She moved like someone who expected the floor to explode. "Former intelligence analyst, 3rd Fleet. Currently unemployed, like you." "I don't have money," Jim said. "If you are looking to rob me, you are going to be disappointed. I have a sandwich and a voucher for a bus ride to nowhere." Ida smirked. "I don't want your money, Jim Hale. I want your hands. The hands that can disassemble a standard-issue rifle in 15 seconds. I checked your old service records. The ones you buried." Jim went cold. "I was a conscript. I washed out. I ran." "You were a scout," Ida corrected. "Top of your class in stealth and infiltration. You ran because you saw the writing on the wall. Smart." She stopped 3 feet from him. "And you are an orphan of Everlight Ridge." Jim lunged. He didn't think. He just moved. He grabbed Ida by the collar of her jacket and slammed her against the container wall. "Do not say that name." Ida didn't flinch. Her silver eyes whirred softly, focusing on his pupil. "They killed my sister there, Jim. Everlight Ridge. She was a teacher. She hid in the basement with her students. The wolves gassed the ventilation system. It took them 4 minutes to die." Jim's grip loosened. His breath came in ragged gasps. He looked at Ida, really seeing her for the first time. He saw the same hollow look in her eyes that he saw in the mirror every morning. The look of someone who had survived when they shouldn't have. He stepped back, letting her go. "What do you want?" Ida straightened her jacket. She tapped her temple near the implant. "I access things. Information that slips through the cracks. I know why you were fired today. Admiral Havelock needed an example. He needed to show the hardliners that he is tough on security. You were just collateral damage." "Tell me something I don't know," Jim said bitterly. "All right," Ida said. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "The order to destroy Everlight Ridge. It was signed by one man, Wolf Admiral Theros Arklaw, the same man whose daughter you just tried to charm." The world tilted on its axis. Jim felt bile rise in his throat. "Theros. He is the butcher of the Outer Rim," Ida said. "And in 48 hours he is going to sign a piece of paper on the flagship Howling Star and walk away a hero of peace. He gets a medal. We get to clean the floors." Jim looked at his hands again. He thought of Pearl, the way she had looked at him. This treaty is a glass sculpture. She was the daughter of the monster who had burned his world. "Why are you telling me this?" Jim asked. Ida reached into her pocket and pulled out a small metallic cylinder. It looked like a standard fuse, but the markings on the side were military grade. "This is a nanite corrosive charge," Ida said. "Small enough to hide in a pocket. Strong enough to eat through the primary gravity stabilizer of a lupine flagship." She held it out to him. "I can get us access," Ida continued. "I have a back door into the janitorial scheduling system. They need extra hands on the Howling Star to prep for the ceremony. Who looks at the janitor? Jim, no one. You are a ghost. You can walk right into the engine room, plant this, and walk out." "You want me to kill the Admiral," Jim said. It wasn't a question. "I want justice," Ida said. "Havelock is playing games, Theros is washing his hands of blood, and Pearl is just the pretty face they put on the lie. If Theros dies before he signs, the treaty collapses. The war restarts. But at least we get to kill the ones who deserve it." Jim stared at the cylinder. It was heavy with implication. If he took it, he was no longer the victim. He was the executioner. He thought of the cafeteria. He thought of the way the security chief had sneered at him. He thought of Pearl's voice. "I am trying to change that." But then, the image of the red sky returned. the scream of the thrusters, the silence of the dead. Theros Arklaw. The man who ordered it. Jim reached out. His fingers brushed the cold metal of the device. "Can you get me on the ship?" Jim asked. "Guaranteed," Ida said. "I can fabricate a new ID. Specialist in gravity deck sanitation. Nobody checks the credentials of the guy plunging the toilet." Jim closed his hand around the nanite charge. It felt cold, like a piece of ice that refused to melt. "I am in," Jim said. His voice was dead, devoid of the humor he had used to shield himself for 2 decades. "If the galaxy treats me like trash, then I will be the thing that clogs their machine," Ida smiled. It was a terrifying expression, sharp and devoid of warmth. "Welcome to the Resistance janitor." Meanwhile, in the high-orbit luxury of the Lupine flagship, Howling Star Pearl Arklaw sat in her quarters. The room was sparse, decorated only by a few hanging tapestries of her clan and a stack of data slates on her desk. She was watching a video loop on her private terminal. It was security footage from the Concord Spire cafeteria. She watched the human janitor approach her table. She watched him pull out the chair. She watched him wipe down the surface, creating a small island of safety for her in a sea of hostility. Jim Hale. She had looked up his file before her father's security algorithms had scrubbed it. An orphan. Nobody. A man who had lost everything to her people, yet still offered her a seat. "Why?" she whispered to the screen. "Why were you kind?" The door to her quarters chimed. "Enter," she said quickly, waving her hand to clear the screen. Wolf Admiral Theros Arklaw ducked his head to enter the room. He was massive, his fur silver-tipped with age, his armor covered in the ribbons of 100 campaigns. He smelled of recycled air and old violence. "Pearl," he said. His voice was a rumble that vibrated in her chest. "We need to review the translation for the opening remarks of the ceremony." "I am not in the mood for speeches, Father," Pearl said, turning her chair away from him. "You had him fired. He was just a worker." "He was a variable," Theros said, stepping closer. "We are 2 days away from the Aurora Accords. We cannot afford variables. The humans are looking for any excuse to claim we are violating protocol." "He made a joke about noodles," Pearl snapped, spinning her chair back to face him. Her ears were pinned back in anger. "Is that a violation of protocol? Or are you just afraid that if we talk to them, we might realize they are not the monsters you told us they were?" Theros sighed. He looked tired. For a brief second the mask of the Admiral slipped, and Pearl saw the exhausted father beneath. But then, the mask was back. "They are not monsters, Pearl," Theros said softly. "They are humans. And that is dangerous enough. You do not understand what is at stake. You think this peace is about shaking hands. It is about survival. If this treaty fails, there will be no one left to write poetry about the rain." He placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. "Stay on the ship. Do not contact anyone on the station. That is an order." He turned and left the door hissing shut behind him. Pearl sat in silence for a long time. She looked back at her terminal. She tapped a few keys bypassing the standard locks and retrieved the deleted file of Jim Hale. She stared at his ID photo. He looked tired in the picture too. "There is something wrong here," she murmured. "Father is afraid. Not of the humans, but of something else." She remembered the look in War Halketh's eyes when he dragged her away. It wasn't concern for her safety. It was anticipation. Pearl reached under her desk and pulled out a small, unauthorized comms unit she had bought from a smuggler 3 months ago. She hesitated, then typed in a search query for the station's employment records. She needed to know where Jim Hale had gone. Because if her father and the human Admiral Havelock were working this hard to crush a janitor, then the janitor was the most important person in the sector. Deep in the service tunnels of Concord Spire, Jim Hale was learning how to be a soldier again. The training ground was an abandoned cargo bay, lit by the erratic strobe of a broken conduit. Ida stood by a console, manipulating a holographic projection of the Howling Star's engine deck. "Again!" Ida barked. Jim moved. He slid across the floor, dodging a swinging crane arm that Ida had rigged to simulate a security drone. He rolled behind a crate, came up on one knee, and pointed the handle of his mop like a rifle. "Bang," Jim said dryly. "You are dead," Ida said, not looking up from her screen. "The thermal sensor caught your body heat. You have to move closer to the coolant pipes to mask your signature." "I am a janitor," Jim grumbled, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I am supposed to be cleaning the pipes, not hugging them." "On the Howling Star, you are whatever keeps you alive," Ida said. She tapped a key, and the hologram shifted. "This is the target, the primary gravity drive. You have a window of 3 minutes during the shift change of the guards." Jim looked at the schematic. It was a suicide run. He knew it. Ida knew it. "And after I plant it?" Jim asked. "How do I get out?" Ida paused. The silence stretched for 5 seconds. "There is an escape pod bay on deck 4, she said finally. "If you are fast." "If." The word hung in the air. Jim stood up and twirled the mop handle. He felt the old rhythm returning to his muscles. The muscle memory of the scout was waking up, shaking off the dust of 2 decades. "I will be fast," Jim said. "I have had a lot of practice running away." "Not this time," Ida said. She looked at him with that terrifying silver eye. "This time you are running toward the fire," Jim nodded. He looked at the hologram of the ship. Somewhere on that vessel was the man who burned his home. Somewhere on that vessel was the girl who liked poetry about rain. He was going to destroy one to save the memory of the other. Or so he told himself. "Let's go," Jim said. "I have a mess to clean up," Ida grinned. "That is the spirit. Pack your bucket, Hale. We are going to war." She threw a switch, and the cargo bay went dark, leaving them in the shadow of the upcoming violence. Above them, the station rotated slowly, turning its face away from the dying star and toward the darkness of the void. The underbelly of Concord Spire smelled of grease ozone and the specific copper tang of recycled air that had circulated through too many lungs. While the upper decks gleamed with the polished facade of diplomacy and the impending Aurora Accords, the service tunnels were a labyrinth of exposed conduit and dripping pipes, a mechanical intestine digesting the waste of the station's thousands of inhabitants. Jim Hale walked these tunnels with a familiarity that bred contempt. For 20 years these shadows had been his office. But today, he was not here to clean them. He was here to learn how to weaponize them. "Stop," Ida Reyes said. Her voice was a whip crack in the damp silence. Jim froze, 1 foot, hovering over a grate. "Look up," she commanded. Jim tilted his head back. Above him, a bundle of fiber-optic cables ran along the ceiling, obscured by grime. "Sector 4 security feed," Ida said, tapping the side of her temple where her neural interface hummed with a faint silver light. "If you had stepped on that grate, the pressure sensor would have triggered a maintenance alert. The camera above would have swiveled 180 degrees. You would be a blip on a screen before you could say, 'mop bucket.'" Jim slowly lowered his foot to the concrete lip beside the grate. "I have walked this corridor 1,000 times. I never set off an alarm." "Because you were authorized," Ida said, stepping out of the shadows. She wore utility fatigues that had seen better days, and her cybernetic eye whirred softly as it scanned the darkness. "You were part of the furniture, Jim. The system ignores the janitor because the janitor is supposed to be there. But you are not a janitor anymore. You are a ghost. And ghosts have to be lighter than air." She walked past him, moving with a predatory grace that made Jim feel clumsy and heavy. "You have cleaned this entire station," Ida continued, her tone bordering on mockery. "You have polished the viewports and scrubbed the toilets. Yet you do not know where the blind spots are. You do not know that the service elevator in Sector 9 bypasses the bioscanners. You are a wasted asset, Hale." Jim adjusted the strap of the heavy tool bag over his shoulder. I counted the oil stains, Ida. I memorized which officer drank coffee and which one drank stimulant tea based on the rings on their desks. I didn't count cameras because nobody looks at the man cleaning the floor until they want to kick him out the airlock. Well, start counting, Ida said, turning a corner sharply. Because where we are going, if you miss a camera, we die. They reached a heavy blast door marked Authorized Maintenance Only. Ida placed her hand on the panel. Her interface flared a brief spike of silver light, and the door hissed open. Inside was a small, disused pump room. It was filled with the rhythmic thrum of the station's water cyclers. On a rusted workbench sat a single, unassuming object, a plastic canister of industrial cleaning fluid. This, Ida said, picking up the canister, is how we end the war, Jim frowned. With concentrated bleach. It is a nanite suspension, Ida explained, her voice dropping to a reverent whisper. Custom-coded. To a scanner it reads as standard issue solvent. Viscosity, chemical composition, everything matches. But once it is exposed to the specific harmonic frequency of a gravity drive core, it wakes up. She tossed the canister to Jim. He caught it, nearly fumbling. It felt deceptively heavy. It eats metal, Jim asked. It eats stability, Ida corrected. It will corrode the magnetic containment field of the primary stabilizers. It won't blow the ship up that would look like an attack. It will cause a catastrophic mechanical failure during the high-stress maneuver of the signing ceremony. The Howling Star's gravity will invert in the command deck. Wolf Admiral Theros Arklaw will be crushed by the weight of his own arrogance. A tragic accident. Jim stared at the canister. And everyone will believe it was an accident. The people who matter will know, Ida said, her human eye hard and cold. There is a group. People high up in the Terran Alliance who know that peace with the wolves is a fantasy. They want this to happen. They want the Accords to fail so we can finish what started at Everlight Ridge. They gave me the tools. I am giving them to you. She was lying. Or rather, she was repeating the lie she had been fed. Jim did not know that the strings led back to Admiral Havelock. He only saw the conviction in her face. We have 48 hours, Ida said. You need to stop walking like a janitor and start moving like the soldier you were supposed to be. The training montage that followed was a humiliating crash course in forgotten violence. They relocated to an abandoned cargo bay in the lower industrial sectors, a vast, echoing cathedral of rust and dust. Ida had rigged up a series of target drones, scavenged maintenance bots reprogrammed to track movement. Weapon up, Ida barked. Jim held the stun pistol she had given him. It felt foreign in his hand, lighter than a floor buffer, but infinitely heavier in implication. A drone whirred to life, darting from behind a crate. Jim raised the pistol, hesitated to align the sights, and fired. The bolt of energy went wide, scorching the wall 3 feet to the left. Dead, Ida called out from her perch on a stack of pallets. You hesitated. You were thinking about the recoil. Don't think, react. It has been 20 years, Jim shouted back. My muscle memory is for wringing out sponges. Then use that, Ida yelled. The next drone buzzed towards him faster this time. Panic flared in Jim's chest. He dropped the pistol, grabbed a long metal pipe lying on the floor, roughly the length and weight of his old mop handle, and swung. Clang. The pipe connected with the drone's sensor array, sending it spinning into a wall, where it sparked and died. Ida stared at him. Did you just mop the target to death? Jim breathed heavily, leaning on the pipe. Target neutralized. Floor area secure. Unorthodox, Ida noted, suppressing a smirk. But effective. However, you cannot bring a pipe to the flagship. Pick up the gun. Again. Hours bled into one another. Jim's body ached. His hands, calloused from years of gripping handles, began to remember the friction of a trigger. He learned to slide into cover, not to clean the baseboards, but to avoid lines of sight. He learned that the ventilation ducts were not just sources of dust, but highways for sound. During a break, Jim sat on a crate, nursing a bruise on his shin where he had tripped over a cable. "You are getting better," Ida said, handing him a pouch of water. "You move quietly. Most soldiers stomp. You glide. It is the walk of someone who spends a lifetime trying not to be seen." "Is that a compliment?" Jim asked. "For this mission, it is the highest praise I can give." Jim took a drink. "Ida, why me? You have the tech. You have the skills. You could do this." Ida looked away, her cybernetic eye dimming slightly. "I have a record. My interface signature is on a dozen watch lists. If I step foot on a lupine ship, their scanners will light up like a supernova. But you are a blank slate. Your service record is buried deep. To the galaxy, you are nobody. And nobody suspects the nobody." Jim looked at the nanite canister sitting on the floor. "I am not a killer, Ida." "You are a survivor," she said sharply. "And sometimes they are the same thing." 300,000 miles away, aboard the heavy cruiser, Howling Star, the air was cold and smelled of ozone. Pearl Arklaw sat in the dark of her quarters, the only light coming from the holographic display of her terminal. Her ears were flattened against her skull, a sign of deep distress. She had spent the last 4 hours digging. She was not a hacker, not like the cyber warfare specialists in her father's fleet, but she was a linguist. She understood patterns. She understood that when information was missing, the silence spoke louder than the data. She had tried to access the official station logs regarding the incident in the cafeteria. File corrupted. She had tried to look up the transfer orders for the janitorial staff. Access denied Level 5, security clearance required. "Level 5, Pearl whispered, "for a sanitation worker." That level of encryption was reserved for espionage cases and high-ranking defectors. It did not make sense. Her father had said Jim was fired for breaking protocol. A simple administrative action. This looked like an erasure. She pulled up the security footage she had managed to mirror before the station wiped it. She watched the human security team dragging Jim away. She saw the way the lead officer touched his earpiece, nodding to a command that wasn't on the local frequency. "They are hiding him," she realized. "Or they are hiding what they did to him." A thought, cold and sharp, pierced her mind. If the humans were this paranoid about a simple interaction, what else were they hiding, and why was her father so quick to agree with them? Pearl stood up. She paced the small room, her claws clicking softly on the metal deck. She could not stay here. The ceremony was in 2 days. If there was a conspiracy, she was sitting in the middle of the target. She went to her closet and pulled out a nondescript gray tunic, the uniform of a junior logistician. She pulled a cap low over her eyes to hide her distinctive facial markings. "I need to go back," she told herself. "I need to find him." Getting off the flagship was surprisingly easy. The security was focused outward, scanning for approaching fleets, not watching for the Admiral's daughter, slipping onto a supply shuttle, headed for Concord Spire. She blended in with a group of Lupin technicians. She kept her head down, carrying a datapad like a shield. As the shuttle detached and drifted toward the station, Pearl looked out the viewport. The spire looked like a needle, stitching the nebula together. Somewhere inside that needle was the truth. The service elevator rattled like a cage of bones as it descended into the bowels of Sector 9. "We need to move the nanites to the forward staging area," Ida had said. "Closer to the docking umbilical." Jim stood in the corner of the elevator, the heavy bag containing the cleaning fluid slung over his shoulder. Ida stood by the controls, her interface linked to the station's grid, ensuring the lift didn't stop at the populated floors. "Nervous?" Ida asked, not looking at him. "Terrified," Jim admitted. "I keep thinking about the gravity drive. If I mess this up." "You won't," Ida said. "Just remember the training. You are invisible." The elevator shuddered and ground to a halt. The doors hissed open, but it was not the empty maintenance corridor they expected. Standing right in front of the doors, looking equally startled, was Pearl Arklaw. She was dressed in gray, a cap pulled low, clutching a datapad. She must have taken a wrong turn seeking the lower levels, or the station's erratic logic had routed two service lifts to the same junction. For a second, nobody breathed. Pearl's eyes widened. She looked from Jim to Ida, then down at the heavy bag Jim was clutching like a lifeline. "Jim!" she gasped. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded Jim's chest. He stepped back instinctively, shielding the bag. Ida moved instantly. She stepped between Jim and Pearl, her hand dropping to the concealed stun baton at her belt. "Identify yourself." Pearl stammered, pulling off her cap. Her ears twitched nervously. "I am what I was looking for." She looked at Jim, her eyes filling with a mixture of relief and confusion. "I was looking for you." "Me," Jim squeaked. He cleared his throat. "Miss Arklaw, you shouldn't be here. This is the trash compaction level. It smells like well trash." "I checked the records," Pearl said, stepping into the elevator despite Ida's menacing posture. "They wiped your file, Jim. Level 5 encryption. Why would they hide a janitor unless something was wrong? I thought they might have hurt you." Jim felt a pang in his chest so sharp it almost hurt. She had come back for him. The daughter of the Wolf Admiral had sneaked off a warship to find a human janitor because she was worried. He gripped the bag tighter, the bag that contained the weapon designed to kill her father. "We are fine," Ida said, her voice smooth and dangerous. She grabbed Jim's arm. "We were just reassigned. Special duty." Pearl looked at Ida, her golden eyes narrowing. She sniffed the air. "You are not maintenance. You smell like ozone and gun oil. And you have a military-grade neural interface." "I am a consultant," Ida lied smoothly. "Pest control. We have a rodent problem in the lower decks." Pearl looked at the heavy bag Jim was holding, and that Jim's mind raced. He couldn't tell her the truth. He couldn't lie effectively to a creature that could smell fear. He had to be something in between. "It is deodorant," Jim blurted out. Ida stared at him. Pearl stared at him. "Deodorant?" Pearl asked. "Bioenzymatic atmospheric neutralizer," Ida corrected quickly, picking up the thread. "Specifically designed to mask certain scents. The station management was worried that the lupine delegation might find the smell of the human sectors offensive. We are scrubbing the vents." It was a terrible lie. It was insulting. And it was exactly the kind of bureaucratic absurdity that Concord Spire was famous for. Pearl stared at them for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of amusement. "You are smuggling air freshener," she asked, a smile tugging at her muzzle. "Because you think we smell you." "We think you have sensitive noses," Jim said, his face burning. "And we eat a lot of garlic." Pearl shook her head. The tension in her shoulders dropped. She looked at Jim, and her expression softened into something earnest. "I am glad you are safe," she said quietly. "What happened in the cafeteria, it was unjust. I told my father that. I told him that firing a man for kindness is the act of a coward." Jim felt like he had been punched in the gut. "What did he say?" "He said that in war kindness is a liability," Pearl said. She took a step closer to Jim, ignoring Ida. "But I do not believe that. I think kindness is the only thing that keeps us from being machines. I wanted to tell you that, and I wanted to invite you." "Invite me?" Jim asked. "To the Howling Star," Pearl said. "I know you are reassigned, but if you can find a way, I want you to see the signing. I want there to be at least one human in the room who isn't looking at us like targets." The irony was so thick, it tasted like blood in Jim's mouth. "I might be there," Jim managed to say. "Working, you know, keeping things clean." "Good," Pearl said. She reached out and for a brief second touched Jim's arm. Her claws were retracted, her touch gentle. "Just don't sit at the wrong table this time." She pulled her cap back on. "I have to go before the shuttle leaves. Be careful, Jim. There are shadows on the station that have teeth. She turned and ran back down the corridor, disappearing into the gloom. Jim stood frozen. The spot where she had touched him felt warm. "She is nice," Jim whispered. "She is a target," Ida said coldly. Jim spun around. "She just came here to make sure I wasn't dead, Ida. She risked her safety for me." "And her father burned your family alive for a tactical advantage," Ida snapped. She shoved Jim back against the elevator wall. "Wake up, Hale. That girl, she is the velvet glove on the iron fist. She talks about poetry and rain while her father's ships turn cities into glass." "She isn't him," Jim argued, though his voice lacked conviction. "She benefits from him," Ida countered. "She eats the food his conquests buy. She sleeps safely on a ship built from the bones of our colonies. Do not let a pretty pair of eyes make you forget the smell of burning flesh at Everlight Ridge." She leaned in her human eyes, wide and intense. "My sister was nice too, Jim. She taught children how to read. And when the gas came, she clawed her fingernails off trying to dig through a concrete wall to get them air. That is what the Wolf Admiral did. Do not forget that." Jim squeezed his eyes shut. The memory of the red sky warred with the memory of the cafeteria. The hate warred with the kindness. But the hate had 20 years of roots. The kindness was just a sapling. "I haven't forgotten," Jim said, his voice hollow. "I will do the job." Ida nodded, satisfied. She hit the button for the lower levels. "Good, because we are out of time." High above, in the command center of Concord Spire, Admiral Corin Havelock stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching a wall of monitors. On one screen, he saw the grainy, black and white footage from a hidden camera in the service tunnel. He saw Jim, Ida, and Pearl standing together. He couldn't hear the words, but the body language was enough. "Touching," Havelock murmured. "The traitor, the radical, and the princess." He tapped a command on his console. A stream of encrypted data was compiled and attached to the video file. "Send this to Warhal Keth," Havelock ordered the room's AI. "Flag it as intercepted intelligence. Narrative. We have discovered a cell of human extremists conspiring with a lupine insider to sabotage the Accords." The AI chirped. "Message sent, Admiral." Havelock smiled. It was a thin, reptile smile. By framing Pearl as an unwitting pawn, or worse, a collaborator, he would drive the lupine hardliners into a frenzy. And when the gravity drive on the Howling Star failed killing Theros, the Wolves wouldn't just blame a rogue janitor. They would blame the human leadership for allowing it. The war would restart. The budget for his fleet would triple, and he would remain relevant. "Chaos," Havelock whispered, "is a ladder, and I am the only one who knows how to climb." 2 hours later, Jim stood in the prep room of Sector 4. He was staring at himself in a cracked mirror. He wore a new uniform. It was dark gray, stiff and uncomfortable, with the insignia of Specialist Gravity Deck Maintenance stitched onto the chest. It was a fake, fabricated by Ida's algorithms, but it looked real enough to fool a scanner. "You look like a soldier," a voice said. It wasn't Ida. It was Mop. The station's janitorial AI spoke from a cleaning drone that was hovering at ankle height, polishing the toe of Jim's boot. "I look like a liar, Mop," Jim said. "Well, you are abandoning your post," Mop said, its synthesized voice dripping with simulated petulance. "I have calculated the dust accumulation in Sector 7 since you left. It has increased by 0.4%. It is a disaster. I hope you are happy." "I have to go, Mop," Jim said, crouching down to look at the drone. "I have to finish something." "Is it about the girl?" Mop asked. "My logic processors indicate a 90% probability that this is about the girl. Biological entities act irrationally when hormones are involved. It is disgusting. I love it." "It's not about the girl," Jim lied. "It's about the job." "Right. The job," Mop said. The drone's LED eye flashed blue. "Listen, Jim. Since you are effectively defecting to the enemy fleet, and since I am technically not supposed to have favorite humans, I found something. Found what? A data packet, Mop said. While you were playing spy in the tunnels, I was scrubbing the digital archives. Deep cleaning. You know, getting the stains out of the server. I found a log file from 20 years ago. It was tagged Everlight Ridge, but it was archived in the human diplomatic database, not the military one. That is irregular. Jim frowned. What is in it? I cannot open it, Mop admitted. It is locked with a biometric key, but the metadata is weird. It has a timestamp that predates the official attack order by 10 minutes. And the origin signal isn't from a wolf ship. It is from a ground relay. Send it to my datapad, Jim said, his heart beating faster. Already done, Mop said. I hid it inside your digital Mop manual. Chapter 4. Advanced Stain Removal. Nobody reads Chapter 4. Jim patted his pocket where the datapad sat. Thanks, Mop. Just come back, Mop said, the drone spinning away. And bring me a souvenir. Preferably not a bomb. I hate bombs. They make a mess. The door opened. Ida was there. She looked tense. It is time, she said. The shuttle is fueling. The Howling Star has cleared you for docking. Jim stood up. He picked up his tool bag, the one with the nanite canister, hidden inside a box of wrenches. He followed Ida out of the room, down the long corridor that led to the umbilical airlock. Through the reinforced glass of the tunnel, he could see the Howling Star. It was massive, a predator, made of steel and intent. Its cannons were capped for the ceremony, but Jim knew they could be online in seconds. He walked toward it. With every step he felt the ghost of Everlight Ridge walking beside him. But for the first time, another ghost walked on his other side, a girl with gray fur who liked bad poetry. He reached the airlock. The seal hissed. The air that hit him smelled of wolf musk iron and power. Jim stepped across the threshold. End the war, he whispered to himself, or burn it all down. He just hoped he would know the difference when the time came. The airlock of the Howling Star did not hiss like the hydraulic seals on the Conquered Spire. It growled. It was a deep, resonant vibration that traveled up through the soles of Jim Hale's boots and settled in his teeth. As he stepped across the threshold, the atmosphere changed instantly. The recycled air of the human station, stale coffee ozone, and anxiety was replaced by something thicker. The interior of the Lupine flagship smelled of wet iron, high-voltage static, and a musk that was distinctly biological. It was the scent of an apex predator's den, industrialized. Jim adjusted the strap of his heavy tool bag. To the casual observer, he was just another gray-clad maintenance technician, a human specialist on loan to ensure the gravity decks didn't malfunction during the historic signing. To the internal security scanners, his ID tag broadcast a clearance code fabricated by Ida Reyes, identifying him as Specialist James Hale Gravimetric Sanitation. Eyes down, human, a voice rumbled. Jim didn't flinch. He kept his gaze fixed on the deck plating, which was textured for claws, rather than boots. A lupine guard, towering 7 feet tall in ceremonial armor, loomed over him. Just here to scrub the graviton emitters, Jim said, his voice flat. Unless you want the Admiral floating upside down during the broadcast. The guard snorted a sound like a steam valve rupturing. Move along, and do not look at the teeth. It is a challenge. I am looking at the floor, Jim muttered as he walked past. The floor doesn't have fangs. The floor also doesn't have the codes to the primary drive, Ida's voice whispered in his ear. The subdermal comms link was crystal clear, bypassing his auditory nerves directly. Keep moving, Hale. You are drifting left. The gravity maintenance hub is near the aft engineering section. I know, Jim whispered back, barely moving his lips. But this ship is built like a maze designed by a paranoid wolf. The interior design of the Howling Star was a study in intimidation. The corridors were hexagonal, lit by running strips of luminescent blue gel that cast long, sharp shadows. There were no chairs, only leaning posts. The handrails were too high for a human. Everything screamed that he was small, weak, and out of place. He reached a junction where a young lupine crewman was struggling with a spill of hydraulic fluid. The boy, he couldn't have been more than 18 in human years, was scrubbing furiously with a rough abrasive pad, making the mess worse. Jim stopped. The clock in his head was ticking down toward the mission window, but old habits died hard. "You are going to scratch the plating," Jim said. The young wolf jumped, his fur bristling. He turned, baring his teeth instinctively. "Back off, Earther," Jim sighed. He reached into his cart and pulled out a chemical sponge. "It is hydrophobic fluid. You can't scrub it. You have to lift it." He tossed the sponge to the crewman. The boy caught it confused. "Press it down. Count to 3. Peel it up," Jim instructed, pantomiming the motion. The young wolf hesitated, then tried it. The purple fluid absorbed instantly into the sponge, leaving the metal clean. The boy looked at the sponge, then at Jim, his ears perking up in surprise. "Physics," Jim said with a shrug. "It works the same for everyone." "I thought humans just used robots for this," the boy said, his voice losing its growl. "Some do," Jim said. "But a robot doesn't know when to use the soft side of the sponge." He leaned on his mop handle. "What is your name, kid?" "Ensign Varick," the boy said. "Second cycle engine maintenance." "I am Jim," Jim said. "And a word of advice, Varick, don't look at my teeth. I have had a lot of coffee today. It is a challenge to anyone's nose." Varick let out a short, barking laugh. It was a startlingly normal sound in this fortress of war. Hail Ida's voice cut in sharp and impatient. "You are fraternizing. We are not here to make friends. We are here to decapitate the command structure." "I am blending in," Jim thought back at her. "Moving now." He gave Varick a nod and pushed his cart forward. But as he walked away, the weight of the nanite canister hidden in his tool bag felt heavier. Varick was just a kid. If the gravity drive inverted, the engineering section would be the first to crumple. Varick would be paced before he knew what happened. Collateral damage, Jim told himself. Like Everlight Ridge. The gravity maintenance hub was less a room and more a cavern of humming machinery. The centerpiece was the gravimetric core, a spinning ring of suspended singularity containment that kept the massive ship generated at 1 standard gravity. Jim set up his workstation near the primary intake valve. He laid out wrenches, diagnostic pads, and a very convincing bottle of industrial solvent that was actually the weapon. He was halfway through unbolting a service panel when the air pressure in the room shifted. "I did not think galaxy-wide sanitation was a real job title." Jim froze. He knew that voice. It was melodic with a rolling cadence that softened the harsh edges of the common tongue. He turned slowly. Pearl Arklaw stood in the archway. She was not wearing the loose diplomatic robes she had worn on the station. Here on her father's ship, she wore a fitted tunic of dark navy with the silver crest of the Arklaw clan stitched over her heart. She looked regal. She looked dangerous. And she looked relieved. "Miss Arklaw," Jim said, standing up and wiping grease onto a rag. "I assume you are not here to inspect the dust levels." "I am here because a little bird told me a human specialist was assigned to this sector," Pearl said, walking toward him. She moved with a silent grace that made Jim feel clumsy. "And I suspected that specialist might be the only human I know who carries a mop like a scepter." "It is a multi-tool," Jim corrected, forcing a smile. "Balance aid defensive weapon cleaning implement. A scepter just sits there." Pearl stopped 3 feet from him. The blue light of the core reflected in her golden eyes. "I am glad you came, Jim. Truly. After what happened on the station, I feared you would hate us." "Hate me?" Jim looked at her. He thought of the nanites sitting on the table behind him. "I don't hate you, Pearl," Jim said honestly. "But it is hard to clean a room when the people in charge keep throwing mud at each other." "That is why we are here," Pearl said. She gestured around the ship. "The signing tomorrow. It is the end of the mud, or the beginning of the cleaning." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. My father is tired, Jim. The fleet is tired. We want to go home. She is playing you, Ida hissed in his ear. She is the velvet glove. Don't forget the iron hand. Jim ignored the voice. If your father wants peace, why does this ship feel like a coiled spring? Because trust is harder than war, Pearl said. War is simple. You see an enemy, you shoot. Peace is complex. You have to see an enemy and invite them to dinner. She smiled, a flash of white teeth that was not threatening. Or invite them to sit at your table in a cafeteria. Jim felt his resolve cracking. He was supposed to be the invisible avenger, the ghost of Everlight Ridge. But standing here, smelling the faint scent of jasmine tea that clung to her fur, he just felt like a tired man lying to a friend. I need to finish this diagnostic, Jim said, his voice rough, before the Admiral inspects the deck. He is on the bridge, Pearl said, but he will be walking the ship later. I should go. I have duties. She hesitated, then reached out and squeezed his forearm. Her grip was strong, warm. Thank you for coming, Jim. It means more than you know. She turned and left. Jim stood there, his arm tingling where she had touched him. Heart rate elevated, Ida noted dryly. Focus, Hale. The panel. Open it. Jim turned back to the machinery. He unscrewed the intake valve with savage twists of his wrench. I am focusing, Ida. Shut up. He slotted the canister into the intake. It clicked into place perfectly. To any sensor, it was just a reservoir of cleaning fluid meant to flush the system. But when Ida sent the signal, the nanites would wake up. They would eat the magnetic seals. The core would wobble. And when the ship executed the ceremonial bow maneuver tomorrow, gravity would crush the bridge. It is done, Jim whispered. Good, Ida said. Now get out of there. And try not to look so guilty. You look like a puppy that ate the furniture. Jim needed air. Or the closest thing to it on a spaceship. He wandered toward the upper decks, using his maintenance clearance to bypass the checkpoints. He found himself standing on a gantry, overlooking the central promenade. Below him, Wolf Admiral Theros Arkla was walking. Jim pressed himself into the shadows of a support pillar. This was him, the butcher, the monster. Theros was not wearing his helmet. His face was scarred, the fur around his muzzle, white with age. He walked with a slight limp favoring his left leg. He was flanked by guards, but he wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the banners of the Terran Alliance hanging alongside the lupine flags. He stopped near a viewport. He spoke to a subordinate, a scarred warrior with one ear. Jim's implant translated the guttural lupine speech in real time. The ink is lighter than blood, Keth, but it is harder to wash off. The subordinate Warhal Keth growled low in his throat. It is a collar, Admiral. We are putting a collar on ourselves. The humans are weak. One more push at the Helios gate and their line would have broken. Theros turned on him. The movement was fast, explosive. And how many more sons would you bury for that push, Keth? How many more daughters? I have filled the void with enough ghosts. I will not add Pearl to the count. Keth lowered his head, baring his neck in submission, but his eyes remained defiant. As you command, Admiral, but a wolf who pulls his teeth is just a dog. Theros sighed, the anger draining out of him, leaving only exhaustion. Then let me be a dog. A live dog is better than a dead lion. Secure the perimeter, Keth. No mistakes. Theros walked away, his limp more pronounced. Jim stood in the shadows, his heart hammering against his ribs. That was not the speech of a monster. That was the speech of a man who was haunted. Don't fall for it, Ida whispered. Hitler loved his dogs. Theros loves his daughter. It doesn't mean he didn't burn a colony of 5,000 people. He sounded regretful, Jim thought back. Regret doesn't bring the dead back, Jim. Justice does. Jim pushed away from the railing. He felt sick. He found the gravity garden by accident. He was looking for a quiet place to eat his ration bar, and he stumbled into a sector marked Biosphere, Variable G. The door opened into a miracle. It was a spherical room 50 feet across. The walls were covered in vegetation from a dozen worlds, purple moss from Xylar, towering fern trees from Earth, crystalline flowers from the silica moons. But the true marvel was the gravity. It shifted. Small, localized generators created pockets of different gravitational pulls. In the center, water from a fountain floated in perfect globules before drifting toward the ceiling. Leaves fell sideways. "It is disorienting at first," a voice said. Jim looked up. Pearl was sitting on a bench that was bolted to the ceiling, relative to him. She was reading a physical book, a rarity. "Miss Arklaw," Jim said. "I seem to have a talent for finding you. Or perhaps you are just drawn to the only places on this ship that are not gray," Pearl said, closing her book. She tapped a control on her wrist, and she floated down, gently rotating, until her feet touched the floor where Jim stood. "What is this place?" Jim asked, looking around in wonder. "My mother's garden," Pearl said softly. She was a botanist, before the war. She believed that if you took a seed from an enemy world and made it grow, you owned a piece of them without killing them. She walked over to a patch of familiar green ferns. "These are from Earth, ferns. They are resilient. They survive in shadows." "Like janitors," Jim joked weakly. Pearl laughed. "Exactly, like janitors." Suddenly, the room hummed. The gravity plates shifted. The floor beneath them tilted sensation-wise, not physically. Down became sideways. Jim yelped as he slid toward the wall. Pearl moved with the instinct of someone who grew up here. She reached out and grabbed his tunic, anchoring him. For a moment, they were suspended in a weird equilibrium. Jim was holding onto her shoulders. She was holding his waist. Their faces were inches apart. Jim could see the flecks of gold in her iris. He could feel the warmth radiating from her. "Do not fight it," Pearl whispered. "Just find your center." "My center is currently spinning," Jim stammered. "Then hold on to mine," she said. The air between them was electric. It wasn't just gravity pulling them together. It was 20 years of loneliness meeting a kindred spirit. Jim leaned in just an inch. Pearl's ears swiveled forward, her eyes softening. Hale Ida's voice screamed in his head, shattering the moment like glass. "I found something. You need to see this. Now. Get to a secure terminal." Jim jerked back as if burned. The gravity stabilized, depositing them both on the floor. "I have to go," Jim said, scrambling up. His face was burning. "Duty calls. Toilets don't unclog themselves." Pearl looked at him confused and hurt by the sudden withdrawal. "Jim." "Sorry," Jim muttered, backing away. "Just sorry." He ran out of the garden, leaving Pearl standing alone among the ferns. Jim found a secluded maintenance terminal in a service alcove near the engine deck. He jacked his datapad into the port. "This better be good, Ida," he thought. "I was busy, almost kissing the target," Ida snapped. "Look at the data Mop sent." "I finally cracked the encryption on the metadata." Jim looked at the screen. Streams of code scrolled past, resolving into a timeline. "This is the comms log from the day of the Everlight Ridge massacre," Ida explained, her voice tight with suppressed rage. "Look at the timestamps," Jim squinted. "E0800 Wolf Fleet enters orbit. E0805. Admiral Theros broadcasts surrender demand. E0810. Colony Governor transmits surrender code. E0812 Wolf Fleet acknowledges. Ceasefire ordered." Jim frowned. "Wait. There was a ceasefire. I remember the bombs falling at 8:15. "Keep reading," Ida commanded. 08. 14 secondary transmission detected from Human High Command Liaison Office. Sender ID Lieutenant CMDR. Corin Havelock. Message content encrypted. Override flash traffic. Wolf Fleet is initiating bioweapon purge. All batteries open fire. Danger close. Havelock sent a fake warning to the colony's automated defense grid, Ida said. He tricked the colony's defense towers into firing on the Wolf ships after the ceasefire. The Wolves thought it was a trap. They fired back in self-defense. Jim felt the blood drain from his face. Self-defense. And look at this, Ida continued. Theros's counter-order at OR 816. The audio file played. It was Theros's voice, younger, frantic. Ceasefire, ceasefire, they are panicking. Target only, the weapon batteries. Do not hit the habitats, I repeat, do not hit the habitats. Jim slumped against the cold metal wall. The monster hadn't ordered the massacre. The monster had tried to stop it. Havelock, the man who had just fired Jim, the man currently smiling on the news as a peacemaker, had started the slaughter to advance his career. We are on the wrong side, Jim whispered. We are on no one's side, Ida said, her voice shaking. We are the patsies, Jim the nanites. If you trigger them, you are killing the only man who tried to save your family. I have to remove them, Jim said, standing up. You can't, Ida said. I just detected a localized lockout on the gravity deck. Someone is in there. Someone with high-level clearance. Keth, Jim realized. Warhal Keth stood in the gravity maintenance hub. He held a scanner in one hand and a datapad in the other. The datapad displayed a message from an anonymous source, Havelock, though Keth didn't know that. It showed a video of Jim and Ida in the tunnels. It showed the schematics of the nanite canister. Keth sniffed the air near the intake valve. He smelled the cleaning fluid. He smelled the human sweat. He reached out and tapped the canister. His scanner pinged red. Unauthorized nanotech detected. Keth smiled. It was a terrifying expression that exposed all his teeth. So, he rumbled to his guards, the humans preach peace while planting poison. Shall we arrest the humans, sir? A guard asked. No, Keth said. If we arrest him now, the humans will deny it. They will say he is a rogue agent. The treaty might still survive. He turned to the guard. We let the device stay, but we recalibrate the shielding. When it triggers, it won't just destabilize the bridge. It will blow the hull. Sir, the guard asked, shocked. But the Admiral? The Admiral has lost his stomach for war, Keth snarled. He will die a martyr, and his death will give me the mandate to burn Earth to cinders. We let the human janitor trigger it. Then we kill him. Then we kill them all. Keth walked out of the room. Leave the device. Set up an ambush at the control junction. When the human comes to check his work, gut him. Jim was running. He wasn't gliding anymore. He was sprinting through the corridors, ignoring the stares of the crew. He had to get back to the gravity hub. He had to pull that canister out before the ceremony started. He turned a corner and nearly collided with a procession. It was the VIP tour. Pearl was leading a group of lupine school children cubs, really, with oversized ears and wide eyes through the ship. She was showing them the history of the fleet. And this, Pearl was saying, pointing to a mural, is the Howling Star. It was built for war, but today, it is a vessel of peace. She saw Jim. Her face lit up. Jim, she called out. The cubs turned to look at the strange human. Jim skid to a halt. He was out of breath. He looked at Pearl, innocent and hopeful. He looked at the cubs. If that canister blew, or if Keth tampered with it, as Ida suspected, these kids would be on the ship when it tore apart. Pearl, Jim gasped. You need to get these kids to the shuttles. What? Pearl frowned, stepping closer. Jim, you are sweating. What is wrong? Hail behind you, Ida screamed in his ear. Jim spun around. At the end of the long corridor, Warhal Keth stood. He wasn't wearing his ceremonial armor anymore. He was wearing full combat gear. He held a plasma rifle, and it was pointed directly at Jim. But Keth didn't fire. He just stared, his yellow eyes burning with hate. He raised one hand and tapped his wrist chronometer. Tick, tick, tick. The ceremony was in 1 hour. Jim looked back at Pearl. Is everything okay? She asked, sensing the fear radiating off him. Jim looked at the girl he was falling for. He looked at the monster waiting down the hall. He looked at the canister in his mind's eye. No, Jim said, his voice trembling. Everything is wrong. He couldn't tell her. If he told her Keth would open fire right here in the hallway full of children, he had to play the game. He had to get to that canister. "I have a clog," Jim lied, the words tasting like ash. "A bad one. I have to go." He turned and ran, not toward the shuttles, but deeper into the belly of the ship, toward the gravity drive. Behind him, Pearl watched him go, her smile fading. She looked down the hall at Keth. The warhowl nodded to her, a mock salute, and followed Jim into the darkness. Jim panted as he ran. "Can you override the nanites remotely?" "Negative." Ida replied, her voice frantic. "Havelock has jammed the signal. He knows we know. Jim, you are on your own. You have 40 minutes before the signing starts. If that canister is still in the socket, the ship dies." Jim gripped his mop handle. It was just a piece of metal. But right now, it was the only thing standing between peace and a galaxy on fire. "I am going in," Jim said. "Jim," Ida said softly. "It is a trap." "I know," Jim said. "But I am the janitor. Someone has to clean up the mess." He rounded the corner into the engineering sector, and the heavy blast doors slammed shut behind him, sealing him in with the hum of the drive and the shadows of the wolves waiting to kill him. The corridors of the Howling Star were never truly silent, but at 3 a.m. ship time, they hummed with a different frequency. It was the sound of a predator holding its breath. Jim Hale could not sleep. The cot in the temporary maintenance quarters was comfortable enough, certainly better than the lumpy mattress back on Concord Spire, but his mind was a tangle of frayed wires. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the nanite canister sitting inside the intake valve of the gravity drive. "It is just a bottle of cleaner," he told himself. "Just a bottle of cleaner that will eat the magnetic seals and crush the bridge into a singularity." He rolled over, staring at the gray ceiling. Ida Reyes had been silent for the last 2 hours. The silence was worse than her orders. It gave him time to think about Pearl. He thought about the way her ears twitched when she laughed. He thought about the way she looked at the ferns in the gravity garden, searching for a connection to a mother she had lost. "I am going to kill her father," Jim whispered to the empty room. "And then, I am going to look her in the eye and tell her it was for peace." The hypocrisy tasted like bile in his throat. He sat up, swinging his legs over the edge of the cot. He needed to move. He needed to walk. If he stayed in this room, the walls would crush him long before the gravity drive imploded. He pulled on his gray specialist tunic. He grabbed his mop handle not because he intended to clean, but because without it, his hands felt empty. It was his anchor, a stick of reinforced alloy that said, "I am just a janitor," to anyone who looked. He stepped out into the corridor. The lights were dimmed to a low predatory blue. He walked without a destination at first, letting his feet carry him along the hexagonal hallways. But deep down, he knew where he was going. The biosphere sector was deserted. The blast doors to the gravity garden hissed open, revealing a pocket of impossible tranquility amidst the warship's steel bones. The air here was rich and humid, smelling of damp earth and alien nectar. The localized gravity generators were humming softly, creating their gentle, disorienting dance. A stream of water spiraled through the air, like a liquid serpent catching the light of the simulated starlight above. Jim walked in his magnetic boots, clicking softly on the plating. He was not alone. Pearl Arklaw was sitting on a stone bench near the Terran fern grove. She was not wearing her uniform. She wore a simple robe of white silk, unbound, and flowing, which made her look less like a diplomat and more like a ghost. She was staring at a patch of violets that were growing sideways on a vertical moss wall. "I thought wolves were nocturnal," Jim said softly. Pearl did not startle. Her ears swiveling toward him was the only sign she had heard him approach. "We are," she said, her voice quiet. "But tonight the stars are too loud." Jim walked over to her. He hesitated, then sat down on the bench, leaving a respectful distance between them. The gravity here was standard, pulling them down toward the deck, but 10 feet away, a tree was growing upside down. "Nervous about tomorrow?" Jim asked. "Terrified," Pearl admitted. She turned to look at him, and Jim saw the exhaustion etched into the fur around her eyes. This treaty, the Aurora Accords. Everyone speaks of it as a victory, but I feel like we are walking on a frozen lake that is cracking beneath our feet. Ice is sturdy if you know where to step, Jim said. Is it? Pearl asked. She looked back at the violets. My father believes that peace is just a pause between wars. He thinks we are signing a ceasefire, not a friendship. And I fear he might be right. If this fails, Jim, if a single shot is fired tomorrow, my generation will be remembered only as the fools who thought they could change the nature of the galaxy. You are not a fool, Pearl, Jim said. The words came out fiercer than he intended. Am I? She looked at him with an intensity that made his breath catch. I brought a human onto a wolf flagship because I liked the way he made a joke about soup. I am trusting the enemy because he has kind eyes. That sounds foolish to me. Jim looked down at his hands, the hands of a killer wrapped around a mop handle. I am not the enemy, Pearl, but I am not a hero either. I am just a guy who got tired of seeing red skies. Red skies, Pearl repeated. Everlight Ridge, Jim stiffened. I read the unredacted history, Pearl said softly. After you told me. I wanted to understand your pain. 5,000 dead. The atmosphere ignited. She reached out and covered his hand with hers. Her palm was warm, her claws sheathed. If I were you, Jim, I would want to burn this ship down. I would want to tear my father apart. Jim's heart hammered against his ribs. The nanite canister was 3 decks away. He had already set the fire. I thought about it, Jim said, his voice barely a whisper. For 20 years I thought that if I could just balance the scales, if I could take one life for the thousands lost, it would be justice. And now, Pearl asked. Jim looked at her. He looked at the hope and the fear warring in her eyes. Now, Jim said, I am not sure what justice looks like anymore. I think justice shouldn't look like another funeral. Pearl squeezed his hand. If only everyone thought like a janitor. She leaned closer. The scent of jasmine and ozone filled his senses. Jim, there is something else. Something about the logs from that day. I found discrepancies, time gaps. If you ever found out that the enemy you hated wasn't quite the monster you imagined, what would you do? It was the question. The pivotal question. I don't know, Jim said honestly. I suppose I would have to apologize. And that would be a very awkward conversation. Pearl smiled, a sad, fleeting thing. Yes. Very awkward. Suddenly, the air in the garden shifted. The hum of the gravity generators spiked, turning into a high-pitched whine. The water stream in the center of the room shattered, turning into a mist that drifted erratically. What is that? Jim asked, standing up. A fluctuation, Pearl said, her ears flattening. The grid is unstable. No, a deep voice boomed from the entrance. The grid is being overridden. Warhal Keth stepped into the garden. He was not alone. 2 heavily armed guards flanked him. Keth held a datapad in one hand and a heavy plasma pistol in the other. His yellow eyes were locked on Jim. Step away from her, spy, Keth growled. Pearl stood up, placing herself between Jim and Keth. Keth, what is the meaning of this? You are interrupting a private conversation. I am interrupting an assassination, Keth snarled. He threw the datapad onto the ground. It slid across the metal, stopping at Pearl's feet. The humans sent us a gift, Pearl. A full diagnostic packet. It seems your janitor friend has been very busy in the engineering deck. Pearl looked down at the pad. A holographic schematic projected upward. It showed the nanite canister lodged in the intake valve. It showed Jim's fabricated ID codes accessing the room. Jim felt the blood drain from his face. Havelock. It had to be Havelock. He had sold Jim out to ensure the chaos happened on his terms. Jim, Pearl whispered. She didn't look at him. She stared at the hologram. Pearl, listen. Jim started stepping forward. Keth fired. He didn't aim to kill, not yet. He fired a warning shot that scorched the deck inches from Jim's boot. "Silence!" Keth roared. "Oh, seize him." The two guards lunged. Jim didn't think. He reacted. He slammed the button on his mop handle that extended the telescopic alloy shaft to its full 6-foot length. He swung it low, sweeping the legs of the first guard. The guard fell, but he didn't hit the ground. At that exact moment, the gravity grid spasmed. Keth had jammed the local controls. Gravity in the garden went haywire. One moment down was down. The next down was the far wall. Jim, Pearl, Keth, and the guards were thrown sideways as the room rotated around them. The water from the fountain became a horizontal rainstorm. "Grab something," Jim yelled. He reached out and hooked his arm around the trunk of a sturdy bonsai tree that was bolted to a rock formation. He dangled there, looking ridiculous, his legs flailing toward the glass ceiling. The guards were not so lucky. They tumbled through the air, crashing into a bed of floating moss. Keth, however, had magnetic boots. He stood on the wall, which was now his floor, and marched toward Jim, looking like a demon walking down a vertical cliff. "You poisoned the ship," Keth shouted, over the whine of the generators. "You threatened the Admiral." He raised his pistol. Jim was a sitting duck, hanging from a miniature tree. "Hey, ugly!" Jim yelled. "Your boots are magnetized, but your head isn't." Jim let go of the tree. Instead of falling down toward Keth, Jim kicked off the rock, launching himself across the zero-G pocket that had formed in the center of the room. He flew, like a missile, leading with the mop handle. Thwack. The alloy staff connected squarely with Keth's helmet. The impact didn't penetrate the armor, but the physics of the blow in low gravity sent Keth spinning. He lost his magnetic lock and drifted spiraling into a cluster of hanging vines. "I hate space," Jim groaned as he crashed into a soft patch of ferns on the ceiling. Gravity snapped back to normal. Everyone fell. Jim hit the deck hard. The wind knocked out of him. He scrambled to get up, but a heavy boot pinned his chest to the floor. Keth was fast. He stood over Jim, the plasma pistol pressed against Jim's forehead. The barrel was hot. "Any last words, janitor?" Keth hissed. "Yeah," Jim wheezed. "You need to floss." Keth snarled and pulled the trigger. Shing. Silver claws, sharp as razors, flashed in the dim light. Keth's hand was knocked aside, just as the weapon discharged, sending a bolt of plasma into the ceiling. Pearl stood there. Her hand was wrapped around Keth's wrist, her claws digging into the gaps of his armor. Her eyes were glowing gold, her lips pulled back to reveal fangs. "I said," Pearl growled, her voice dropping an octave into the primal register of her ancestors. "Stand down." Keth looked at her, shock registering on his scarred face. He was a warhowl twice her size, but the authority radiating off her was absolute. "He is an assassin, Pearl," Keth said, though he lowered the weapon. "The evidence is undeniable." Pearl released him and turned to look at Jim. The betrayal in her eyes cut deeper than any plasma burn. "Is it true?" she asked. Her voice cracked. "Did you plant it?" Jim sat up, rubbing his bruised chest. He could lie. He could say it was a setup. But looking at her now after the conversation they just had, he couldn't do it. "Yes," Jim whispered. Pearl flinched as if he had struck her. "Why?" she breathed. "Because I thought your father was a monster," Jim said. "Because I didn't know you." "Take him," Pearl said. Her voice was cold dead. "Take him to the Admiral." The interrogation room on the Howling Star was not designed for comfort. It was a metal box with a single chair and a high-intensity light. Jim sat in the chair, his wrists bound by energy cuffs. Warhowl Keth stood in the corner, looking pleased. Pearl stood by the door, her arms crossed, refusing to look at Jim. And sitting opposite him was Wolf Admiral Theros Arklaw. Theros held the nanite canister in his hand. He turned it over, examining the human markings. "Ingenious," Theros rumbled. "Simple, brutal. It would have crippled the ship during the bow. We would have been crushed. A poetic death for a gravity-based fleet." He placed the canister on the table and looked at Jim. "Why?" Theros asked. You know why, Jim spat. The fear was gone, replaced by the old cold anger. Everlight Ridge. My name is Jim Hale. My mother was Sarah Hale. My father was David Hale. They were farmers. You burned them. Theros went still. His ears twitched slightly. Hale, Theros repeated. I remember the name. It was on the colony manifest. You remember the manifest, Jim laughed bitterly. Do you remember the scream of the thrusters? Do you remember the order to fire? I remember every order I have ever given, Theros said. He leaned forward. His eyes were not the eyes of a killer. They were the eyes of an old man carrying a mountain of stones. Including the order to cease fire. You missed, Jim sneered. Or your aim was bad. We did not miss, Theros said. We were fired upon. After the surrender. Liar, Jim shouted, straining against the cuffs. We had no weapons. We were a farming colony. We surrendered. I know, Theros said. That is why I accepted it. Pearl stepped forward. Father, what is he saying? You told me it was a tragic engagement. A communication error. It was, Theros said. He looked at his daughter, then back at Jim. But not on our side. Enough of these lies, Keth barked from the corner. He is a human spy. He is trying to sow discord. Kill him and be done with it. Silence, Keth, Theros roared. The power in his voice shook the walls. Theros looked at Jim. Human. You have hatred in your heart. It is a powerful fuel. But it burns dirty. Are you sure you want to know the truth? Because the truth will not give you your parents back. It will only take away your enemy. Give me the truth, Jim challenged. If you have it. Theros reached for a data pad. Suddenly, the ship rocked. Red alert lights began to flash. A siren wailed, a rising, discordant howl that signaled an external threat. Report, Theros shouted into his comms. The bridge officer's voice crackled through the speaker. Admiral, we are tracking multiple unauthorized drone launches from the Terran delegation shuttle. They are locking onto the flagship. Drones, Theros frowned. The humans are attacking. They are broadcasting a distress signal, Admiral. They claim they have sabotaged their shuttle, and they are firing in self-defense. Jim froze. It was Havelock's Plan B. The Admiral stood up. Shields up, intercept those drones. It is too late for shields, Keth shouted. They are inside the perimeter. This is the assassin's backup plan. He pointed his gun at Jim. He distracted us while they launched the real attack. No, Jim yelled. It is Havelock. He set us both up. He wants you dead so the war restarts. Keth didn't listen. He leveled the plasma pistol at Jim's head. Wait, Pearl screamed. The ship rocked again violently this time. An explosion somewhere on the hull. The lights flickered and died, replaced by emergency amber. In the confusion, Jim's neural interface buzzed. It was a sensation like a wasp sting behind his ear. Jim, can you hear me? It was Ida. Her voice was static-filled but frantic. I am in the Spire's mainframe. I broke the encryption. I have the raw audio from Everlight Ridge. I am sending it to the ship's PA system. They have to hear it. Ida, no, Jim shouted. They will track you. It doesn't matter. Listen to the truth, static screeched through the interrogation room speakers. Then, a voice cut through the noise. It was younger, desperate, but unmistakably Theros. Cease fire. Cease fire. By the Great Wolf. Stop firing. They are civilians. Open the escape corridor. Vector 39. Get them out. Then another voice. Cold. Human. This is Lieutenant Commander Havelock. Target the Wolf command ship. Ignore the ceasefire. Fire all batteries. The recording ended. Silence filled the room, heavier than the gravity of a neutron star. Pearl stared at her father. Tears streamed down her face. You tried to save them. Theros closed his eyes. And I failed. Keth lowered his gun. He looked confused. His entire worldview that humans were dishonorable monsters and wolves were noble warriors was shaking. Jim sat in the chair, the sound of Havelock's voice echoing in his skull. It was Havelock. All this time. The man who signed his paycheck. The man who fired him. The man who gave Ida the nanites. Havelock had killed his parents, and Theros had tried to save him. "Unshackle him," Theros said quietly. "Admiral," Keth stammered. "Unshackle him," Theros bellowed. "He is not the enemy. The enemy is sitting on the observation deck waiting for us to die." Pearl rushed forward and tapped the code into Jim's cuffs. They hissed open. Jim rubbed his wrists. He stood up. He looked at Theros. "I tried to kill you," Jim said. "And you failed," Theros said grimly. "Try not to fail at saving us." "Admiral," the bridge comms crackled again. "The drones have breached the outer hull. They are hunter-killers. They are heading for the Grand Hall. The signing ceremony, the delegates are trapped in there." Havelock is in there, Jim realized. He is going to sacrifice his own people to make the massacre look real. "We have to get to the hall," Pearl said. She looked at Jim. "Can you fight?" Jim picked up his mop handle, which had been confiscated and left on the table. He extended it with a snap. "I am a janitor," Jim said, a dark smile touching his lips. "I clean up trash, and Havelock is the biggest piece of trash in this sector." The Grand Hall of the Howling Star was a masterpiece of diplomacy. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling. A long table of obsidian was set in the center. Now, it was a kill box. Chaos reigned. Human and lupine delegates were scrambling for cover as 3 sleek black assassination drones hovered near the ceiling. Their laser cannons were strafing the room, pinning everyone down. Havelock crouched behind the heavy obsidian table. He held a communicator barking orders to his security team to return fire, a performance for the cameras that were still rolling. "Regrettable," Havelock muttered to his aide. "The wolves have turned on us. We have no choice but to purge the ship." The doors to the hall exploded inward. Jim Hale burst through the smoke, flanked by Pearl and Theros. "Havelock!" Jim screamed. Havelock looked up, his eyes widening. "You should be dead." "I am hard to kill," Jim yelled. He sprinted across the room, dodging a laser blast from a drone. "Keth the drones!" Theros shouted, drawing his ceremonial sword. Warhowl Keth and his guards poured into the room, engaging the machines. Plasma fire erupted, filling the air with ozone and light. One drone broke away from the pack. It ignored the guards. Its sensors locked onto a single target, Wolf Admiral Theros. "Father!" Pearl screamed. The drone dove. Theros raised his sword, but the machine was too fast. It charged its primary cannon, a glowing red eye of death. Jim was 20 feet away. He didn't have a gun. He didn't have a shield. He had a mop. He saw a spilled pitcher of water on the polished floor, the result of the panic. Slope. Velocity. Friction. Jim threw himself into a slide. He hit the puddle of water, his boots acting like skis. He slid across the marble floor, accelerating past the confused delegates. As he slid, he jammed the end of his alloy mop handle into the floor grate, using it as a vaulting pole. He launched himself into the air. For a second, Jim Hale, the janitor of Concord Spire, was flying. He intercepted the drone just as it fired. He swung the mop handle like a baseball bat. The heavy alloy head smashed into the drone's optical sensor. Crunch. The impact threw the drone off course. The laser blast went wide, scorching the tapestry behind Theros instead of his chest. Jim crashed into the drone, wrapping his arms around its chassis. "Going down!" he yelled. The drone spun wildly, unable to compensate for the extra weight. It crashed into the floor, skidding across the obsidian tiles, until it slammed into a pillar and exploded in a shower of sparks. Jim rolled away his tunic, smoking, his eyebrows singed. He stood up, coughing. The room went silent. The other drones had been neutralized by Keth's guards. Jim stood in the center of the wreckage, holding his bent mop handle. He looked at Havelock, who was standing up slowly from behind the table. "It is over, Havelock," Jim panted. "We heard the logs. "We know about Everlight Ridge," the delegates murmured. The cameras zoomed in. Havelock straightened his uniform. He smiled, but there was no humor in it. He reached for his sidearm. "You have a recording," Havelock sneered. "I have a fleet, and history is written by the victors, not the janitors." He raised his gun, aiming not at Theros, but at Jim. "Goodbye, Mr. Hale." Bang. The shot echoed like a thunderclap. Jim flinched, expecting the pain. But he wasn't hit. Warhal Keth stood to Jim's right, his plasma pistol smoking. But Keth hadn't shot Havelock. Keth had shot Jim. Or rather, he had tried to shoot the drone that he thought was rebooting behind Jim, but in his battle blindness and prejudice, his aim had drifted. The plasma bolt caught Jim in the shoulder. The force of the impact lifted Jim off his feet. He flew backward over the railing of the raised platform, where the signing table stood. "Jim!" Pearl screamed. Jim fell. He fell past the decorative banners. He fell past the stunned faces of the delegates. He fell into the darkness of the service shaft that ran beneath the Grand Hall. The last thing he saw before the dark swallowed him was Pearl running to the edge, her hand reaching out, and the look of absolute horror on Theris's face. Then he hit the maintenance netting 3 floors down, and the world went black. Above him, the chaos of the peace conference was just beginning. But in the dark, Jim Hale smiled. He had cleaned up the mess. Now he just had to survive the fall. The darkness smelled of burnt circuitry and old dust. It was a familiar smell, the scent of the deep, forgotten places of a space station. But this time, it was accompanied by the sharp metallic taste of blood in Jim Hale's mouth. He groaned, trying to shift his weight. Pain flared in his left shoulder, hot and blinding, but it was a dull ache compared to the agonizing throb in his chest. He reached up with his good hand, his fingers brushing against the scorched remains of his specialist tunic. Beneath the fabric, the heavy polymer exoskeleton of his maintenance suit designed to protect sanitation workers from falling debris and hazardous waste was shattered. "Armor integrity at 12%, a synthesized voice chirped in his ear. "Also, you have fallen 3 stories. According to the safety manual, you are supposed to be dead. Please confirm status." Jim coughed the sound, rattling in his lungs. "I am alive, Mop. Unfortunately." "Excellent," Mop replied. "I have canceled the order for a memorial plaque. It was going to be very expensive. Bronze is pricey these days." Jim rolled onto his side, blinking against the gloom. He was lying on a safety mesh in the sub-maintenance level of the Howling Star. Above him, through the grate, he could see the distant flickering lights of the Grand Hall. The shouting had stopped, replaced by the heavy thud of boots and the whine of emergency klaxons. "Ida," Jim croaked. "I am here," Ida's voice came through his neural link. It was shaky, stripped of its usual cool detachment. "I have a lock on your vitals. Your shoulder is a mess, Jim. The plasma bolt fused the suit to your skin. But the exoskeleton took the kinetic force. You are lucky." "I don't feel lucky," Jim muttered, struggling to sit up. "I feel like I just got shot by a wolf." "Listen to me," Ida said, her voice turning urgent. "You cannot stay there. Havelock is locking down the ship. He is going to purge the logs. He is going to spin this. He will say you were a rogue agent, a radical who tried to kill the peace." "He already said that," Jim grunted, grabbing a support strut to pull himself to his feet. "Yes, but now we have the proof," Ida said. "Jim, while you were falling, I finished decoding the Everlight Ridge packet. Mop helped. We bypassed the checksums. And you need to see it," Ida said. "I am sending a repair drone to your location. It has a medical stimulant and a localized data link. Follow it. There is a secondary medical bay in Sector 9 off the grid. Get there, now." A small, spherical drone buzzed down the shaft, its single blue eye glowing in the dark. It extended a small injector arm. Jim winced as the needle pierced his neck. Cold fire rushed through his veins, dulling the pain and sharpening his vision. "Let's go," Jim whispered, picking up the only weapon he had left. The alloy mop handle was bent at a 30-degree angle, scorched and dented, but still in one piece. Just like him. The secondary medical bay was a small, sterile room used for covert operations or illicit poker games, judging by the scuff marks on the table. The repair drone hovered by the door as Jim stumbled in. A holographic terminal flared to life in the center of the room. Ida's face appeared pixelated and tense. "Sit down, Jim," she said. "I will stand," Jim said, leaning on his mop handle. "Show me." "Prepare yourself," Ida warned. "Everything you think you know about that day is wrong." The hologram shifted. It was no longer Ida. It was a window into the past. Timestamp 20 years ago. Location, Everlight Ridge Colony. Jim's breath hitched. He saw the familiar red sky. He saw the smoke rising from the burning silos. The audio crackled. It was the voice of Wolf Admiral Theros Arklaw. "This is Admiral Arklaw to Terran Command. We have ceased fire. I repeat, we have ceased fire. Your civilian population is exposed. We are detecting a biological containment breach in Sector 4. We are pulling back to allow for evacuation." Jim frowned. Sector 4, that was the fertilizer plant. "It was not fertilizer," Ida's voice narrated softly. "It was a covert bioweapons lab. Havelock was the project lead. He was developing a pathogen designed to target lupine DNA. The recording continued. A new voice cut in. Cold, precise. "Lieutenant Commander Corin Havelock. Negative, Admiral. We read your pullback as a tactical flanking maneuver. We are engaging automated defenses." Then, a private channel log recorded on the encrypted Terran network. Havelock, speaking to his subordinates. "If the Wolves take Sector 4, they find the pathogen. If they find the pathogen, the Alliance is charged with war crimes. Burn it. Burn it all. Target the silos. Trigger the secondary explosions. Make it look like an orbital bombardment." Jim watched in horror as the Terran defense towers turned their guns inward. They fired not at the Wolf ships, but at the colony's own infrastructure. The explosions ripped through the shelters. "He did it," Jim whispered, his hands shaking. "He killed us to hide his science project." "Keep watching," Ida said. The video feed switched. It was a shaky, chaotic view from a helmet camera. A lupine soldier was running through the burning streets of the colony. The soldier was coughing, his armor battered. The soldier kicked down the door of a collapsed basement. Inside, a human woman lay dead, Jim's mother. But shielded beneath her body was a small boy crying, his face covered in soot. Jim stared at the boy. He stared at himself. The Wolf soldier didn't draw a weapon. He holstered his rifle. He reached down his large clawed hands, gentle. "Easy, pup," the soldier growled in broken common. "I have you." The soldier picked the boy up, tucking him against his chest plate. He ran. He ran through the fire, shielding the human child from the falling debris. Above the roar of the flames, a sound echoed. A long, mournful howl. Jim had heard that sound in his nightmares for 20 years. He had always thought it was a cry of bloodlust, a victory song. But now, with the translation software running on the datapad, the howl resolved into words. "Medical Team Sector 9 survivor found. I have a survivor. Clear the path." It wasn't a hunting cry. It was a distress signal, a plea for help. The video ended with the soldier handing the boy off to a Terran evac shuttle that had finally landed in the ceasefire zone. The soldier collapsed, his lungs burned by the chemical smoke. The hologram faded. Jim stood in the silence of the medical bay. Tears streamed down his face, cutting through the grime and soot. "He saved me," Jim whispered. "A wolf saved me." "Theros tried to stop the shelling," Ida said softly. "The soldier who carried you out, he died 3 days later from toxin exposure. His name was Vane. He was Pearl's uncle." The revelation hit Jim like a physical blow. The irony was so heavy, it threatened to crush him. He had spent his life hating the very bloodline that had sacrificed itself to keep him alive. "I have been fighting the wrong war," Jim said. His voice was no longer the voice of a victim. It was the voice of a man who had woken up. "We all have," Ida said. "But now we have the ammunition to end it. Jim Havelock is in the strategy room. He has summoned Theros and Pearl. He is going to execute them for treachery and frame you as the assassin. He has blocked external comms. I can't broadcast this to the fleet." "Then I have to deliver it by hand," Jim said. He looked at his bent mop handle. He looked at the data drive Ida had ejected from the terminal. "Can you get me into that room?" Jim asked. "I can override the door locks," Ida said. "But once you are in, you are on your own. There are guards. There is Havelock." Jim slotted the data drive into his belt. He picked up the mop. "I don't need an army," Jim said. "I just need the truth. And maybe a bucket to catch the lies." The strategy room on the Howling Star was a circular chamber dominated by a massive tactical table. The walls were lined with screens displaying the positioning of the fleets outside. The tension in the room was palpable. Wolf Admiral Theros Arklaw stood on one side, his hand resting on the hilt of his ceremonial sword. Pearl stood beside him, her face pale, but her eyes defiant. Warhal Keth and a dozen wolf guards were tense, their weapons drawn, but lowered. Opposite them stood Admiral Corin Havelock, flanked by his own elite human security detail. "The situation is regrettable, Admiral," Havelock said, his voice smooth, oily. "But the facts are clear. A human radical known to have associated with your daughter attempted to sabotage this ship. My drones merely intervened to neutralize the threat." "Your drones fired on my bridge," Pearl shouted. "You tried to kill my father." "Collateral damage in a chaotic environment," Havelock dismissed her. "The assassin Jim Hale is dead. His body has been disposed of. Now we must discuss the terms of the restructuring. Given the security breach on your flagship, the Alliance can no longer trust the Lupine Empire to uphold the safety protocols of the treaty. We will require full demilitarization of the border sectors." "You want our teeth," Theros rumbled. "You engineer a crisis, kill a man, and then demand our surrender." "I demand security," Havelock said. He placed a datapad on the table. "Sign the amended accord, Theros, or my fleet, which is currently targeting your engines, will open fire." "Do not sign it, Father," Pearl hissed. "If I do not sign, 5,000 of my crew die today," Theros said heavily. He reached for the stylus. The heavy blast doors of the strategy room hissed. They tried to open, jammed, and then groaned as the hydraulics were forced. Clang, clang, clang. Someone was hitting the door mechanism. "Security," Havelock barked. "Check the entrance." Before the guards could move, the doors slid open with a screech of protesting metal. Jim Hale stood in the doorway. He looked like a specter rising from a grave. His gray tunic was shredded and burnt. One side of his face was smeared with dried blood and grease. He dragged his left leg slightly, but in his right hand, he held the bent alloy mop handle like a spear. "Sorry I am late," Jim rasped. "The elevator was out of order." "Jim!" Pearl cried out. She took a step toward him, her impulse to run to him, warring with the guns pointed in her direction. "He is alive!" Keth muttered, his eyes widening. Havelock's composure cracked. For the first time, genuine fear flickered in his eyes. "Kill him," he shouted to his guards. "He is the assassin." "Hold fire!" Theros roared. His voice shook the room. "This is my ship. No one fires without my command." The wolf guards leveled their weapons at the human guards. A standoff. Jim limped forward. He didn't look at the guns. He looked straight at Havelock. "You said I was dead," Jim said, his voice echoing in the silent room. "You were wrong about that. Just like you were wrong about the bioweapons. Just like you were wrong about Everlight Ridge." "He is raving," Havelock sneered, though his hand drifted toward his sidearm. The fall scrambled his brain. "Mop," Jim said clearly. "Announce me." The ship's intercom crackled. The voice of the janitorial AI filled the room, bypassing the security lockouts Ida had dismantled. Attention on deck. Arriving now, Specialist James Hale. Designation: the janitor who refused to be taken out with the trash. Current status: angry. Wardrobe status: distressed chic. A ripple of confused, nervous energy went through the room. Jim reached into his belt and pulled out the data drive. He threw it onto the obsidian table. It slid across the surface, stopping directly in front of Theros. "Play it," Jim said. "Don't touch that," Havelock yelled. "It is a virus." Theros looked at Jim. He looked at the battered man who had tried to kill him hours ago, and saw something different now. He saw a mirror. Theros slotted the drive into the table's interface. The hologram sprang to life. The strategy room was bathed in the red light of the recorded memory. Havelock's voice filled the air, cold, calculating, ordering the death of his own people to hide his crimes. The image of the wolf soldier saving the child played out in high definition. Pearl covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. "Uncle Vane?" Keth stared at the recording. He watched the human towers firing on the human settlement. He watched as Admiral trying to stop the slaughter. When the recording ended, the silence was absolute. Jim leaned on his mop, exhausted. "You told me that humans need enemies to be strong, Havelock. You said war keeps us united." Havelock looked around. His guards were lowering their weapons, looking at him with disgust. The narrative had collapsed. "It is the truth," Havelock shouted, desperate now. "Look at history. Without conflict, we stagnate. I did what was necessary to ensure humanity's dominance. I made the hard choices." "No," Jim said softly. "You made the easy choice. It is easy to kill. It is easy to hate. It is easy to lie." Jim looked at Theros. "Strength isn't about how many people you can turn to ash. Strength is looking at the person you hate most and realizing you were wrong." Theros nodded slowly. "We are beasts," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But we are not the ones who wear the monster's skin today." Havelock's face twisted. He realized he had lost the room. He realized he had lost the fleet. "I won't be judged by a janitor and a dog," Havelock snarled. He moved with sudden speed, reaching for the console. "Delete, purge the core." He slammed his hand onto the emergency erase command. The screens flashed red. "Deleting, no," Pearl shouted. But then the screens blinked green. "Error. File in use by System Administrator MOP." "Nice try, Commander," Mop's voice chirped. "But I have rerouted the data to the most secure server on the ship, the sewage recycling logs. You cannot delete it without flushing the toilets. And nobody flushes on my watch without paperwork." Havelock froze. He reached for his gun. He never cleared the holster. Jim moved. He didn't shoot. He didn't stab. He swung the bent mop handle in a low arc. Crack. The alloy struck Havelock's wrist, shattering the bone. The gun clattered to the floor. Havelock fell to his knees, clutching his hands, screaming. Jim stood over him. He raised the mop handle, poised to strike again. The anger of 20 years surged in his veins. He could end it. He could smash this man's skull and be done with it. "Do it," Keth growled from the sidelines. "He deserves it." Jim looked at Havelock, pathetic and broken. Then he looked at Pearl. She was watching him, holding her breath. He lowered the mop. "No," Jim said. He tapped the handle on the floor with a heavy metallic thud. "This isn't a battlefield anymore. It is a crime scene. And I am just cleaning up the mess." He looked at the wolf guards. "Take him. He stands trial. A joint trial. Human and wolf laws." Theros stepped forward. He placed a hand on Jim's good shoulder. "Agreed. He will answer for Everlight. And he will answer for today." Pearl walked up to Jim. She didn't care about the blood, or the soot, or the smell of the maintenance shaft. She wrapped her arms around him and buried her face in his chest. "You came back," she whispered. "I had to," Jim said, wincing slightly, but holding her tight. "I forgot my bucket." The signing of the Aurora Accords took place 3 days later. It was not the ceremony that had been planned. The grand speeches were scrapped. The pomp and circumstance were replaced by a solemn gravity. The table was not set with flowers, but with data slates containing the full, unredacted history of the war. Admiral Theros Arklaw stood on one side. A new interim human representative stood on the other. But the cameras were not focused on them. Standing behind the table center stage were three figures. Ida Reyes, wearing a clean technician's jumpsuit, her cybernetic eye gleaming. Pearl Arklaw in her diplomatic robes but wearing a human-style scarf. And Jim Hale. Jim was wearing a suit. It was ill-fitting, borrowed from a sub-lieutenant, and his arm was in a sling. But he stood tall. "This treaty," Theros spoke to the galaxy, "is not a promise that we will never fight. It is a promise that we will never lie about why we fight. It is built on the truth brought to light by those who refuse to let the darkness win." He signed. The human representative signed. Then, Theros handed the stylus to Jim. "Witness it," Theros said. Jim took the pen. He looked at the camera. He thought of his parents. He thought of Vane the wolf soldier. He signed his name. Jim Hale. Janitor. 6 months later. The cafeteria on Concord Spire had been renovated. The DMZ, the empty zone of tables between humans and wolves, was gone. Instead, long communal tables filled the room. The smell of ozone was still there, but it was mixed with the scent of spices from a dozen worlds. Jim sat at a table by the viewport, staring out at the nebula. It was no longer a bruise on the sky. It was just a cloud of stars, bright and promising. He poked at his bowl of noodles with a fork. "It still tastes like regret," Jim said. "It tastes like progress," Pearl corrected him. She sat opposite him, eating a lupine meat pastry with delicate bites. "The sodium content has been reduced by 3%. "Truly a golden age," Ida said dryly, sliding onto the bench next to Jim. She dropped a datapad on the table. "The Council of Reconciliation just approved the budget for the new memorial at Everlight Ridge. They want you to give the dedication speech, Jim." "I am not a speechmaker," Jim said, chewing a rubbery piece of faux chicken. "I am a civilian envoy. My job is to shake hands and make sure nobody hides bioweapons in the fertilizer sheds." "You are doing a good job," Pearl said. She reached across the table and wiped a speck of sauce from his chin. Her touch lingered warm and familiar. "The tension in the border sectors has dropped by 40% since you started your tour." "People like the story," Ida said. "The janitor and the princess. It is romantic. It sells peace better than any politician could." "It is not a story," Jim grumbled, though his ears turned pink. "It is just work." Suddenly, the station's PA system chimed. "Attention, patrons," Mop's voice echoed. "Please be advised that under the new Hale Arklaw statutes, sitting next to the Wolf Admiral's daughter is no longer grounds for termination. However, spilling coffee on the peace treaty is punishable by mandatory latrine duty. Also, Jim, you have a meeting in 5 minutes. Stop flirting." Pearl laughed, the sound bright and clear. "He is never going to let you forget, that is he." "Never," Jim said. He looked at her. "Pearl, about that day, in the cafeteria. If I hadn't been fired, if none of this had happened, would we still be here?" Pearl tilted her head, considering. "If you hadn't been fired, you would have come back the next day to clean my table. And I would have said hello. And maybe eventually you would have sat down anyway." "I would have been terrified," Jim admitted. "Yes," Pearl smiled. "But you would have done it. You have a habit of doing the right thing even when you are scared." "I would have dragged the whole station over to sit with us," Jim said, "just to dilute the awkwardness." "As long as someone cleans up afterward," Ida said, stealing a piece of Jim's fake chicken. "We are a family now, Jim. A weird, dysfunctional interspecies family born from the ashes. But a family." Jim looked at them. Ida, the spy who found a conscience. Pearl, the wolf who loved rain. And him, the man who found peace at the end of a mop handle. Yeah, Jim said. Family. The small diplomatic shuttle, the clean slate, drifted out of the docking bay of Concord Spire. It was a modest ship, unarmed, painted in white and blue. In the cockpit, Jim sat in the pilot's chair. Pearl sat in the co-pilot seat, checking the navigation charts. Ida was in the back, monitoring the news feeds. Jim looked at the dashboard. Mounted there in a custom-built magnetic bracket was the object. The alloy mop handle. It was bent. It was scorched. It was scratched. But it was polished to a shine. "Ready for departure, Envoy Hale?" Pearl asked. "Course set for the Outer Rim," Jim said. "There are a lot of colonies out there that need to hear the truth." He reached out and tapped the mop handle for luck. "You know," Jim said softly, "I lost my job for sitting next to you. Now I fly across the galaxy with you. Not bad for a janitor." Pearl looked at him, her eyes shining with the light of the nebula. "Let's see if you can clean up the whole galaxy, Jim." Jim smiled. He engaged the thrusters. The ship surged forward, leaving the shadow of the station behind, flying into the open, endless starlight. "One mess at a time," Jim said. "One mess at a time." The stars streaked into lines of light, and the clean slate vanished into the jump, carrying peace in its hold.